Well, I'd say yours.
It must have more than, the year electric, more than 30. They show them.
Those are the areas that
Oh,
you
well.
can have your.
And Pam was already on her way back.
Wait a minute, that's maybe your personal storage.
Yeah, I counted Phil. Yeah, yeah.
You get to go to the game, you can take it back and wait. Well, do we have the sound on yet?
No, you want it?
I suppose we better do that. Want our YouTube fans to be able to hear everybody well.
Got a big phone.
Actually, 5 minutes behind already.
Y'all set for now?
All ready there now? Well, John, it's your turn first. You go to office.
I, John Mortensen, do solemnly swear to support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Minnesota, and to discharge faithfully the duties of the office of City Council Member of the City of Kenyon, Minnesota, to the best of my judgment and ability, so help me God.
Well, welcome aboard, John. Okay, we call the August 11th, 2015 council meeting to order. All council members, including our newest president, Administrator Olson. I'll remember your name this time, Joe. Engineer Ryan. And unfortunately, Scott, our usual attorney, is not here.
Sarah Sensala from Kenyon Graven.
And I don't see any citizens here to make comments. So we can move on to the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Well, there's one item, appoint John Mortensen to park board in place of Doug. We talked about that at the park board meeting,
I guess we would
so we should
put
put
that under
new
new
business.
business. Below council representative to the zip rail task force. And if there's nothing else, do we have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Consent agenda. Do we have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And I don't see Senator Schmidt here for the legislative update, so I guess we move right on into engineering.
Yeah, by the way, he did say that he couldn't make it
Okay.
tonight.
So we move into engineering, update on the First Street feasibility study. I think we've gone through quite a bit of that in the work session already, but
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
for the record.
For the record, for the benefit of the audience and for the minutes, we did just have a work session on the First Street feasibility work. We met with all of the council and staff, reviewed the status of our investigation of the background information that we've been gathering and the steps we're moving forward. And the result of that work session was that it appears that council is interested in considering authorizing feasibility report at their next meeting. And so we will be preparing information and bringing it forward to you so that you can consider taking the action to actually order a feasibility report on the project, most likely with the limits being from Red Wing Avenue to Bullis Street.
Thank you, short and sweet. Item B, the fire facility project. I'm not sure who's going to take over here.
I can kick it off. This evening we have with us Corey Brunson from Brunson Architects, the architects that's working with us on the project for the proposed fire station. In your packet is a memo that we put together on the results of the space needs analysis. We have met twice with the fire committee, once to get some information gathering on the desires for the new fire facility, what the needs would be, what spaces should be sized like, what activities should be included, what things maybe aren't necessary in the fire station. Corey and his staff developed it into some block diagrams, a couple of different layouts for how the fire station could work. We reviewed that at the second meeting with the fire committee. They indicated their preferred option out of the ones that were presented. Also indicated some tweaks that they wanted to see made. Corey and his staff then went back and polished it up and turned it into a preliminary floor plan. He's got that information tonight that he's going to be presenting to you in just a moment. Attached with our memo is the summary of the programming that Corey and his staff developed, along with the space needs analysis by activity and by the square footage per activity. And then after that are the floor plans for the first and second floor of the fire station, along with the preliminary site plan. So with that, I will let Corey walk through the items they've developed, and after that we can talk about the next steps if the council wishes to continue development of the project.
Joe, do you have a copy, an extra copy of the, I can follow the format. Thank you so much. Super. Honorable Mayor, City Administrator, Council members, thank you so much for inviting us here tonight, for allowing us to be a part of this exciting process, the beginning of something that certainly could be great. I commend you on taking careful and cautious first steps in even something as simple as selection of the site. Having us help you evaluate with the selection criteria, a very transparent process, the pros and the cons and the developability, if you will, of each of the sites and look at them for what they're worth. That was very, very smart. We feel we have a very, very workable site, and I was excited when we dove into it and started to develop concept layouts, as mentioned, as Joe mentioned, some block diagrams, just how well the site receives the building. And it's something that we can see. Sometimes we can't put our finger on why, but it sure was very, very evident. I think we have a very workable solution for you today that we would like to present. Again, as Joe mentioned, it is the result of several meetings and intake meetings with various members of your community and staff, and of course the fire chief as well. The first document that we start with was a programming summary. That document basically lays out what are the real hot items that you're looking for in your fire station facility. Of course, we evaluated that we're going to be using a full craft site. We always want to make sure we have expandability in any particular building design. Okay, one never knows why. Okay, Kenyon may not grow monstrously, but that doesn't mean we won't have additional space needs. I mean, we just don't know. An ethanol plant could show up, and all of a sudden you need trailers for a triple F home. You know, so I mean, we just don't know what equipment we're going to need in the future as a result of new upcoming needs. So, with that being said, expanding the facility is very, very important, both in the administrative area as well as the apparatus bay area where the vehicles are stored. Making sure that there's a vehicular separation between anybody coming to the fire station, maybe utilize the meeting room for whatever reason, and leaving apparatus. We want to make sure we keep them separate, and you'll see that too. So there's a number of different criteria that we looked at. We documented that and produced that as a programming summary. And we sent it back and we said, is this correct? are we hearing what you're after? And the answer came back yes. So with that being said, we took that information, and the next document is preliminary space needs analysis. And we took the information and assigned typical square footages to those space needs, okay? Having an office that's 10 by 12 can accommodate certain things, and it can't accommodate certain things. You can't have 4 to 5 people in a space like that. If you have a desk, you can meet with somebody across from the desk. So there's little aspect ratio decisions that we make when we're assigning square footages to spaces like this. So we assigned the square footage to it, and we tallied up at the very, very end. I can go through the spaces. There's an office for the fire chief. File room, which would be a future office, currently would have file cabinets in it. Again, it is the same size as the other office. Open office areas are administrative spaces that are large. A space that you can put cubicles in or individual desks. It's very flexible. A meeting and a training room. It is extremely important these days with, how many here have a hybrid car? Anybody have a hybrid car? You do, Mark? Okay.
Every SUV, yeah.
All right, well, if you cut that hybrid car in the wrong spot, you're going to kill a fireman. And you might kill the people inside the car. It's extremely important. It's never been more important for firemen to have adequate space for training than today. And so having the ability to have a lecture type setup with tables and chairs, the ability to have presentation material and equipment like you see here is so very important. So a space that can accommodate about 30 to 40 people in a training room, a meeting classroom sort of an atmosphere, that's what we've accommodated. Okay? A kitchen space that can be utilized to serve that meeting room. Storage room near the offices for tables and chairs, etc. A dedicated wash bay. Now, I always make the statement that no 2 fire hall projects should really be designed alike because everybody operates a little bit differently. And it was really interesting because every time I make that statement, it's confirmed. As I sat down and started to do the information intake from the fire chief and those involved, it really did become apparent that yes, you guys actually are very, very unique. And that's not a bad thing. It's just good to know. When responding to a fire, they can actually, their desire is to roll through the building and use the overhead fill stations to fill instead of going to a hydrant hookup because it's faster. So there's little things like that actually come into play when laying out the floor plan and the site plan to respond to the needs of the fire department here locally. Which, by the way, serves greater than just your little community here. It's of course got a fire area of how many square miles are you?
I don't know.
Put them on the spot. But they're inside town, they're outside of town. Sometimes they're dropping drop tanks. And their standard operating procedures, the SOPs we'll be referring to, are just a little bit different than other stations, okay, that we've designed. So that's really nice. You'll see acronyms in here, and feel free to stop me. SCBA is self-containing breathing apparatus. That's the bottles. Basically, they go on the back, okay, and on the pack. And in the design of these facilities, we want to make sure we have room to work on those, service those, keep them safe, right, and get those filled. So there's a lot of engineering that goes into even the preliminary design of the fire hall. So as you go down through this list, there's storage, there's utility, hose towers can serve not just to dry the hoses, because cotton hoses will actually rot away, okay? You have to dry them out. Well, there's a couple ways to do that. You can put them in a hose dryer, which is fairly expensive. You can hang them in a hose tower, or you can try to run them down the wall, or lay them on the floor. And in all of those concepts, except for the hose tower, you end up spending a fair amount of money to get something that's going to be a future pain in the butt. So we found some opportunities to try to use hose towers in ways that service additional needs of the building. That have training, that have access to storage, that have access to the roof. You can use it for ventilation. I mean, smoke rises, right? So when you turn the apparatus on, the diesel fumes and smoke goes to the ceiling, that can get pulled out to the highest section of the roof, which is the apparatus bay. We can actually utilize that as a vent shaft to get the exhaust gases out quickly. And it's needed anyway. So there's a lot of duality of purpose that we try to bring to the table when we're producing conceptual plans. And I just want you to be aware that those things are taking place. Okay? You can see there's some storage rooms near the meeting room. Storage room, for example, in a design like this, if this was tables, we'd have a set of doors over here. We'd take those tables, collapse them, and maybe even the chairs and slide them in on racks in that room so that we can use this room in a different fashion, okay? For training, maybe Rescue Randy comes out, they're doing refreshers for their certification, being first responders, okay? So you take all the square footage needs in there and total it up. We take, on the second page there, you can see we added 20% circulation, which is 640 square feet, minus the apparatus bay area. And the reason is because the apparatus bay area already has the circulation built into it. So we don't need to double dip in making the building any larger than it needs to be. So we're saying that we need circulation between those offices, and between the restrooms and that type of thing. Recommended total building square footage of 16,400 square feet, roughly, is the early sniff test on that. We took that information, go to the floor plan if you would. Well done, next sheet, there you go. And we took the programming information, the speeds, and the space needs assessment, and we assigned a block diagram to that. Now, I didn't bring, you actually have one. Let me have your block diagram, that nice, pretty, sketched up document. Thank you. Yeah, there it is, right there. So this is a block diagram. They start out pretty crude. We went through several of these. We did this for the site layout as well as the building layout. And we met with the group and said, you know, what do you like? What do you dislike? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? And we took the good from each and we combined them into a concept and actually made it quite functional. The result is the document that you have with you, the floor plan is in more of a CAD form. So it went from this to that, okay? Just because it's hard-lined like this doesn't mean it doesn't change. It just means it's an easy way for us to disseminate, start having you think about where access to the building can be, okay? How the spaces are going to relate to each other. It takes on a more formal floor plan. From this, as Joe mentioned, the next step for us would be to take and extrude the building and give it some form. We can't estimate what it's going to cost to do that until we have an idea of what the outside of this thing is going to look like, what it's made of. And once we get to that point, and that would be in the next steps that I'm sure Joe will have a conversation on. The second floor, you go to the next slide, please. Is that of a storage mezzanine? You can go a little further. There you go. Right above the office area is proposed storage. The hose tower again continues all the way up to the roof deck, and the stairs then access, so that everything else is kind of open to below. Okay. The next slide would be the site. There it is. It's in black and white. There we go. Some of the things that we take into consideration. Remember when we were talking earlier about wanting to make sure we have room for expansion. The proposed building footprint right here, which is enumerated in that floor plan you just saw, is now illustrated on the site plan. And again, this is a Bullcraft site, but you can see the dashed lines out here showing if we need more space, it is available. And then the parking would just kind of work its way around. We are going to need a stormwater detention pond for this particular parcel due to its size and the MPCA requirements. But here's the separation between the vehicular circulation we talked about earlier. We want to have returning vehicles come back, but have responding vehicles exit out and be able to hit Highway 56. Thank you. Yep, my eyes are pretty good. Highway 56, or be able to head back down Centennial Drive. But keeping that traffic completely separated from anybody that's trying to enter into the parking area is really, really critical. I always say the first thing we do when we're designing a firehouse, we design for safety. And we do that throughout the building. That's why you'll never see turnout gear, the gear they put on behind vehicles, because people have a tendency to get excited. If they hear there's a fatality or it's my neighbor and their house is on fire, they get in the vehicle, and some of the new pumper trucks are not, the old stick shift, or you push the button, right? And I mean, people can push the R instead of the D very easily. R for racing, right? It happens, and people get injured every single year getting backed over when responding to emergencies. So I want to make sure that we're always looking at every opportunity for safety to keep separation, keep segregation, okay? So that's really, really important. We also want to make sure we have a fair distance of space, a fair distance between access from a arterial to a major artery. We want to make sure we have some turning radiuses, and all those things are considered even at this early level. So the site's great. It pitches really towards the river, I believe Joe, right? And towards the pond. It's got great southerly access. There's so many good things about this site that we like. Its locations are quick to the large roads that both go north and south as well as through town, so it's pretty slick. Are there any questions in regards to what I've presented so far?
Yeah, I do have one.
Okay.
16,000 some square feet, 700 square feet.
Yeah.
Okay, how close to, we're looking at a fire hall for about $1 million, so that puts it right around $60 a square foot. How close is that? Is that in line?
Well, a couple things. One, the 16,000 square feet also is including the storage mezzanine, which won't be priced out at nearly the same cost per square foot that the rest of the facility would be. As far as the budget, we wanted to take a look at the potential for the site. We wanted to make sure that we could facilitate a facility that would meet today's needs based upon the programmatic information that you have. Now, we didn't have conversations about what structural system we were going to use, Fred, to be able to move forward. There are different structural systems that we would have to explore in order to attempt to meet your budget. And it is conceivable that if the program is so much larger than your budget is, that we might have to do some prioritizing.
I look at there's a lot of blacktop there.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of doors.
Right.
But say we go with different structures, say what's the minimum, what's the maximum of 16,000 square feet? You've done enough fire halls so you know from what can we expect from the bottom end to the top end.
For you talking about cost per square foot for construction?
Yeah. Like say, you've had enough experience by reading your, so I know you've got a pretty good idea.
Yeah, I do, and the challenge there is, the challenge with that is that it takes more time to be able to fine tune and get you that definitive answer. Why? Because there's multiple structural systems that we can look at to do this. But some of those structural systems don't make sense in shorter spans, and they do make sense in longer spans. The other thing that's really difficult right now is the economy, the labor force, the amount of the cost per square foot for construction right now is at an all-time high. Now, will that occur in 2016? I can't tell you. I don't have a crystal ball.
You're kind of avoiding my question.
No, what I'm telling you is that it's a difficult question to answer. We can see fire hall projects from $150 to $250 a square foot, depending on structural system.
So what's the bottom? I mean, what?
Well, I'm telling you, if you were to go to a pre-engineered metal building, you'd probably be looking at somewhere between $140 and $160 a square foot starting. Now that doesn't include the mezzanine. Now that's footprint. And if you look at the first floor, there's a 14,000 square foot footprint.
So that doesn't include the parking lot?
No, it does. It does.
That does.
Yeah. Now, in order to fine tune this, what you're trying to do is to get a sniff test on what you can get for X, Y, Z dollars. That's really the next step of this, is to fine tune both the floor plan, the site plan, and your budget. I don't have a definitive budget that we were given to develop this. We were just assigning. We were taking the programmatic information and assigning it to a block that can be shaped back. We have a wash bay in here that If we can't afford it, it's probably the first thing that gets cut.
I guess that was an understanding we talked all along, and just with market stuff, we've always figured down $1 million, and I always figured, well, it's gotta be maybe a little higher than $1 million. All of a sudden, by your figures, we're over $2 million.
Well, what I'm telling you is that we would need a definitive target, and we would then take the building footprint, and we would have to shrink it in order for it to meet your budget. I'll tell you that right now, that has to happen, yeah.
Because I gotta be honest with you, I don't think the citizens of Kenyon are gonna go along with a $2 to $3 million fire hall, personally.
Do not-
Yeah, I think that's difficult. I think one thing too to remember with this now, with changes, provisions, and this is a draft, and I need to emphasize that, but the first plan that they came with was 10 bays. And during the fire facility committee meeting process, it was expressed that basically 2 more bays would be optimal. So he added those bays to this. So that's something that wasn't on the plan, on the kind of the diagrams you've seen before. And so that may or may not be feasible from a cost standpoint. Because now you're going from 10 to 12, and yeah, if we're getting in the range of $1 million, I'm not even, I mean, that's 2.5. Yeah, that's not even on the radar as far as I'm concerned. So it's kind of like right now, starting with the top, like we do with the budget. This is kind of everybody's wish list and what they'd like to see. And now what we have to do is kind of get back to looking at, okay, what do we feel we can afford? And then taking that list and trying to get what these guys need, prioritize what they need with what, you know, we have, what we can afford in effect. And obviously what we can afford is, you know, that's not a set number, but we have kind of an idea. We've talked 1 million to 1.2 million, and I think that's come a lot from previous, you know, studies that were done back in, say, 11, 12, and then 2007. And I think that's kind of where some of those numbers may have come from, you know, was getting in that range of $1 million. Probably goes back to that. But that's, like Corey's saying, that's where, you know, Corey comes in and just kind of draws up what the facility committee has talked about. He's talked to myself, and, I guess a few other people, but I mean, basically it's been that fire facility committee, and that has a good representation of the fire department. So taking what they've expressed they'd like to see in a new facility and putting it down, you know, on paper, and now putting it on a site that we're looking at, or we're gonna, you know, probably close on pretty soon. But now, right, the rubber hits the road here in this next part of the next phase of this process. And we say, well, here's what we think we're gonna be able to work with, and then we go back to the committee, and Corey goes back and works with them, and we kind of work our way back down.
It really wasn't fair to Corey not to give him this figure first off, because I think he's wasted a lot of time and you know, plans, knowing that this is kind of a wishful thinking.
You know, one of the things that we've done is we've done the difficult task of getting the programming information. So we have a footprint, or at least adjacencies. You know, the training rooms next to the kitchen, next to the toilet rooms in the offices. We have all this laid out. To make it smaller is not that difficult. What we have to do is we have a project triangle. So we have cost at one corner, quality at the other, and quantity at the third. Cost, quality, quantity. Okay. If you have, we'll just throw a number out. If you have, I'm just going to throw $1.5 million out. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying $1.5 million, and that's your maximum tolerance. You're not going to spend any more than that. Then I have to either adjust the quantity, the size of the building, or I got to adjust the quality, which doesn't mean it's you know, a pole building. It just means it's a different structural system, right? You got to give me control of 2 corners to make the third one happen. I'm hearing you say you have a maximum budget concern, okay? Then that's one corner of the triangle. I got to have control of the other 2. I can't be fighting about needing to add more space into the building when you have a maximum budget concern. So that's just the way, it's just your typical project triangle. The information that's gleaned in this study that you see before you, Fred, is actually very usable, even if we have to pare it down or we have to look at a different structural system to be more cost effective, okay? I will tell you that a lot of other communities are trying to build fire hall facilities that will withstand a natural disaster. That a straight line wind of 100 miles an hour aren't going to tear this thing down and lay it down on top of all the apparatus in it. And so precast is a pretty good solution, but it's more costly. There's other less expensive options like pre-engineered metal buildings, and those can't withstand those types of winds, but they do function quite well. So looking at those different systems, Fred, is why it's really tough to address your question of what's it cost. Well, what do you want? And not to be flippant, but it's a challenge. And how big is it? Is this piece 2.5 stories or 2 stories? Are we really crunching this down on the mezzanine, or do we not have a mezzanine? These are all questions that are actually solved now with that one corner of the triangle being defined by you.
Well, it's one of those deals where we have to sell it to the
Oh, I get it.
citizens.
Yep. No, and I would help, and I will help you do that. That's what we do. We will help the fire department and council develop a substantiation for this facility. Why is it needed? Right? Why is it needed? So that's a part of what we can do.
The public has spoken, because with the surveys and stuff, fire hall is number one, and we know we need a fire hall, and that's a given fact.
Yep.
Nobody's going to disagree with that.
Yep.
It's just, we got a beautiful site.
Yes, you do.
Now it's just,
Be diligent, responsible, right? Yeah, I understand.
And part of this too, when you talk about this layout in this building with the 10 bays, this goes back to the last time that this kind of planning process went on back in 2011. It was this building pretty much, and it was 10,000, 11,000 square feet. And back then, maybe it was $1 million to $1.2 million, estimate. I'd have to go back and look. It was somewhere in that range. But this is what he more or less started with, was what was discussed at that last process, and actually the one before that. And what that reflects is what the fire department has kind of said they need, and it's been fairly consistent. And this isn't that much different than those times. What's different is the construction price has gone up. And that's where we're running into probably difficulty is going to be, we're dealing with, I think what's been a pretty consistent plan for maybe 10 years. But now the problem is that cost has gone from maybe $900,000 to $1.5, $1.6 million, or maybe more during that time period. And that's not unusual. But this really, I don't think is anything different than what has been talked about for 7, 8, 9 years. I think what's different now is that these bays were added here over here. And I think beyond that, there's not a ton of things that are different. I think Corey's really been able to break this down with this planning process much, much better than any other architects have been able to do in the past, because he's a fireman, so he understands this. He lives and breathes this, and he knows what works and what doesn't. So he's given us an extreme amount of detail when you read through the space breakdowns and all these things. And I think it's going to be very helpful as we go on here. We didn't have that before. But the bottom line is this building isn't that much different than what was talked about before.
One thing here, we're getting a lot more realistic estimate of what it's going to take to give us what we need. Probably some of the cost estimates from before were unrealistically low because people, the architects laying them out, didn't have the knowledge that Corey has of exactly what is really needed to make a good functioning, lasting, ready for now and the future fire hall. It's a big investment. But it's a very long-term investment.
And there's still some,
And financing would be long-term also.
yeah, there's still some things that are gonna have to be pulled together here that, you know, from a funding standpoint, and frankly, I don't think any of us really know how that's gonna turn out. I mean, we've got other partners involved in this that we serve that some have expressed things to us and other ones haven't, that we have to go out and meet with, that we don't know yet what's gonna happen with that. And we can't really go out with them until we have a product, until we have some numbers to talk about, which we are gonna have now. But I mean, we're at a point now where the other two processes were, and I think they kind of just stopped. And that's where we're at right now. And those processes were very similar to where we're at now, but now comes the part of going from, okay, this is what the fire department would like to see, and I want to oversimplify this, to now all of a sudden starting to crunch the numbers and taking the financing that we have, and then backing into this and saying, okay, here's what it's going to cost, and here's what we think the, you know, the amortization is going to be, what kind of financing we can get. And that's now when the rubber hits the road, as the old saying goes, and where we have to say, if it looks like it's, well, if we're talking $2.5 million, that's not even on my radar, $2 million isn't either. But basically, that's when we maybe have to start, you know, getting into, and there is, we don't know the answer, I don't have the answer, okay, what is the bottom line, what is the most, no, I mean, that hasn't been determined yet. But I mean, you know, that's the next part of this process now. And that's going to be where we flesh out what we can afford politically in fact, and, you know, still try to provide what the firemen need. And, you know, there's going to be quite a bit of work to do there, obviously.
Yeah, I'm gonna say this, I was to each one of these meetings from the very beginning, and I had a different idea of what was really going on, but I will say this here, that Corey, I really feel did your homework in teaching me and making me understand this type of building and what you're doing. I see a lot of things that are being not duplicated, but that particular fire, like you mentioned about the compressor room, you could use it for training purposes. Mike, you were there too.
Yeah.
And that, so personally, I feel that he has done a good job. I am very comfortable with what you're doing so far.
That was kind of
I don't like the $2 million either, because somebody's gonna have to explain. The only thing that I am saying is, I don't wanna see it put out into the public, which is here, that it's like the old phases, because that sounded like a Taj Mahal at one time. We need, in other words, the building size and all that, just, you know, this is what we need.
I don't think it was, though. If you look at this now, and you look at what was talked about before, I don't think it was a Taj Mahal. It was based on what the firemen said they needed, and it was 10 or 11,000 square feet, but I don't really think it was, it never got past the point of this, though.
Okay.
And so numbers that are being discussed now are, that's the problem when you talk with preliminary numbers.
Well, what I hear out there is, we don't want what we had before. That was out of the question. I don't think there was too many people that bought on that idea, and that's pretty much why it phased out. I just don't want it to go back to the past. I want to go from here forward.
I was actually on that committee.
Okay, there you go.
Some of the plans that came through had community rooms for the public to use, had a big kitchen for the public to use. And I can't remember the price. This is more basic, makes more sense.
Thank you. Any other questions relative to what we presented? Get pushed to speak.
Well, that really catches everyone up and summarizes what's been done to date, where we are currently at. It's the plan that you've seen that's been developed, and as Corey said, this is the first development of the quantity of building that the programming needs indicated would be the desired building. Now, the next steps in the memo that we've got laid out is we could have Corey working with us, take this floor plan, develop it into a rendering, a three-dimensional rendering of what the building would look like, develop a cost estimate, a realistic cost estimate based on the floor plans laid out, based on the site plans laid out, and package that information, bring it back and review it with the city again. And at that point, that might be where you have the start of this process, where you can start to chisel away and shape and mold the building within that triangle that Corey talked about, try and get the quality of the building and the quantity of the building to come in line with a cost that the city can accommodate. So I guess we're kind of at that point, as the administrators talked to me about, is if you want to take it that next step, we've laid out that out in the memo to have Corey and we work together to develop the information so we can get to a point where we can start to be massaged. Would be those next three steps of the rendering, the statement of probable costs, and then the presentation to the city. And the estimated cost to do those activities is $6,800. So I guess at this point, that would be the next consideration for the council to make, is if you want to take that next step to continue to develop this process where we can get it to start to massage it to fit within that triangle of the cost, quality, and quantity.
We don't want to stop now.
Well, we definitely need the numbers. I mean, that's, well, we need the numbers, and we have to go, I think, have the committee meet again once we get those estimates from you, and then come back to the council and kind of start with, it may take a couple months, I don't know.
And the presentation that we put in here is specifically left it open that it would be a presentation of the city. So whether you'd like that to be a committee meeting, which I kind of sense that if the process would be to go back to the committee before it comes back to council.
Well,
especially since the
that's
committee
what we've
has
done all
some representation. So yeah,
Every
it's a good sounding board, and they really have a lot of good knowledge on this building too. We certainly we do want to take this step by step, and as we've indicated, be diligent, so we're not spending money excessively or getting out too far ahead of ourselves. We are taking this step by step. So this next authorization would be just to do this next step of taking what's been developed to this point, developing it to the point where you can actually see what the building would look like, how it would sit on the site, what the estimated probable cost would be, package that information back, bring it back and review it, so then the work can start to massage it to get it to fit to be a realistic project.
And the goal, from my perspective, would be to work with that committee and the fire chief to be able to try to squish this down to the point where it's more tolerable, and find that building system that is meeting your budget, and try to come in with something that's more palatable than the Taj Mahal, as you said earlier. Right? So that would be the goal, and that process would start upon approval of this next process. So what I'm saying is you wouldn't get a cost estimate from us that's the Taj Mahal and then expect us to whittle it down. We start that effort now. And then the rendering would then represent that as well.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. I would assume the fire chief would rather have a building project than just paper. So we certainly, right, is that right?
Yep.
So it's in everybody's best interest to be diligent with these efforts and everybody's time, which I greatly do appreciate. Okay? Thank you for your time.
So we need a motion now to authorize, or is that already?
I think that
No,
would
you
be
need to make a motion if you move ahead with the next phase.
So then, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving along.
Thank you, Council.
Item C, Post Street and Sixth Street Overlay Project.
Mr. Mayor, item B2, phase 1.
Oh, the environmental assessment.
Correct.
I'd already put that behind me.
Just very, very quickly, the phase 1 assessment is complete. It was delivered to the administrator last week. We sat down and reviewed it together. There was a little bit of language in there that the administrator requested some clarification be made on the conclusion section. So we're updating that phase 1 And the updated version should be ready by the end of this week or early next week, and it will be and we'll develop new updated copies to the administrator. But what I can tell you is the finding of the phase one, as written in the conclusion section, is the assessment revealed no evidence of recognized problem environmental conditions in connection with this property itself. However, it did find that there's other sites in the area of this property where there is the potential for contamination from underground fuel tanks, things like that. So what it's recommending is that if and when construction happens on this site, that during construction process, the workers be observant of if they see any evidence of the sheen from petroleum projects, or if they smell anything. And if that were the case, then additional sampling would be necessary. Which is basically the case when you're constructing on any site, that if you see or smell something that seems like it could possibly be contamination, you're going to stop and investigate. So
We had that problem out on Main Street, we had to bring in a whole bunch of dirt and get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. With this underground tank you're talking about, that's not on this property, that would be to the north of the railroad embankment, correct?
correct. And when you get a chance to review the actual phase one, it lists multiple sites that are in the area of the property and assumed on underground, the direction of underground water flow towards the river. The conclusion is that it says the potential for contamination from the activities on the site cannot be completely eliminated, which is why they're leaving the door open that if and when construction occurs, just need to be aware of visual evidence or evidence through odor that there's contamination. But the site itself, the property that the city is buying, came back clean. So that's in general the finding of the phase one, is that there's no need to do any more environmental investigation or assessment on the site before you proceed with purchase of the site. So, good news, good findings from the phase one for the property. Just that, with any other construction site, when you're going to dig, if you see something or smell something, you're going to have to stop and check it out.
That's probably a pretty common recommendation.
Correct. Yep. And I did talk with our staff that prepared this, and she did say that, yeah, it's fairly common. Finding the phase one is that you need to be aware when you're under construction if you see any evidence of contaminations. So that is the update on the phase one.
Okay.
Unless there's any further questions.
So then we can move on to the Bullison Street project.
Yes, at your last meeting, you had quotes on doing some overlays. And you had two quotes that you had received, one from McCann Paving and one from Bituminous Materials Incorporated. And there was some discrepancies between the quotes when you try to compare them. One contained some information that the other one didn't, and vice versa. So you tabled the matter last meeting and asked us to do a little investigating to see if we could get comparable information so you can make an informed decision. And in your packet is a memo that we put together. We did reach out to McCann Paving to ask the questions for those areas where there were discrepancies between their quote and the quote from Bituminous Materials. And I talked with them on the phone a little bit, and I asked them if it would be okay if I actually sent them an email with our list of questions so they could respond in writing, and then we could just attach it right to their quote and show that updated information. And that is included in your packet, the actual email that I sent to them with the responses back in red. And when we reviewed that, we put together a cover memo for you. We did find that there is some discrepancy between their quote and the quote received from Bituminous Materials. The quote from McCann does not include adjustment of manholes or gate valve boxes within the work area. It does not include any appreciable traffic control, which Bituminous Materials quote did. They did clarify that their original quote didn't clarify if they were going to mill at the ends of the street or at the intersections where they were going through intersections. They'd only indicated about milling along the curb lines. So we asked them if they would be milling at those other areas, and they said, yes, if the city wants that done, they would mill it. However, they didn't clarify whether or not there would be additional cost. They also declined to provide the square yards of surface area upon which their quote is based, although the other quote from Bituminous Materials did provide this quote is good for this many square yards of surfacing. We asked for 3 references, preferably from public entities, since we had not worked with them before. They did provide 2 references, but they failed to provide a 3rd reference, either public or private.
And what were the responses when you contacted the 2 references?
We did not take it that far yet because of the discrepancies in the quotes. We wanted to get further direction from council, because really what it comes down to is, at this point, when I look at the 2 quotes, they are not equivalent. So my recommendation at this point is it would not be appropriate to allow LeCan to update their quote to address the items such as traffic control, structure adjustments, the additional milling cost. It would not be appropriate to allow them to adjust their number that they have quoted you without allowing the other contractor the opportunity to adjust their number as well. So my recommendation would really be, if you find that the LeCan quote is not equivalent to the Bituminous Materials quote, then you could reject the LeCan quote, select the Bituminous Materials quote and award them the work, or you could reject both quotes and solicit 2 new quotes. In that case, we would actually provide a list of line items, this many square yards of paving, this many lineal feet of milling, this traffic control, and get 2 new quotes that are apples to apples. So that would be my recommendation: either reject LeCan and award to Bituminous Materials, or reject them both and solicit 2 new quotes. And that's why we didn't bother to check the references on LeCan, because we weren't going to be coming forward with a recommendation to accept their quote.
Joe, will you give any different figures if we solicit another set of quotes? Is it gonna be any different?
Well, the cans will obviously be different.
LeCan's would go up
Requiring-
because we would be putting more requirements on it.
And BMI is gonna be the same.
Correct. Yeah. And when I looked at, there's about a $9,000 difference between the quotes. But when I look at BMI quotes, they've got close to $3,000 in traffic control and structure adjustments. So LeCan, you'd have to add that much on LeCan's right away. Now, we don't know what they would charge for milling, the extra area, if they were going to charge for that. We don't know if they've allowed for the same square footage that Bituminous Materials had. If we got into a contract with them and it turns out they hadn't, then I think they'd be charging us more for each square yard we added to the project. So even though there is a discrepancy in LeCan's cost appears lower, I think the fact with discrepancies, I don't think we can say that in fact their cost is lower.
My feeling is at this point in the year, we should award the BMI and get the project rolling.
Do you have any idea when they'd start, if we awarded it?
Well, that's a subject that we'll be touching on it later in the agenda, but BMI does have some other work in town that it appears are going to be coming into work, coming into the city probably later this month.
Yeah.
Or early in September to do the work. So I would imagine they'd probably try and mobilize and do both these works at the same time. It'd be most cost efficient for them.
The reason I asked the question is that the street they're going to be doing is the main artery for the school buses. That's the way they come in and go up.
So we would try to get them in here
Oh,
before
that's
that.
section on
Yeah.
six.
I think that
Bolts too.
they can work, the buses can work around, I think they can, traffic will, for the most part, still be going through those areas because it's not like a complete, reconstruction. It may be down to 1 lane, but I think that's one thing we can try to press upon is to get out before school starts, and school starts a little bit later this year based on Labor Day being later.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if it's going to be more, if it's going to require more traffic control for them, if the buses are in service, it's going to be better for them if they can get done before the buses are running, because they include traffic control in the quote. So they'd probably like to get that done before school starts, so they don't have the hassle.
Move on this,
Yeah.
get it done.
Correct.
On this year.
Yeah, getting back to your question, Councilmember Warsmith, I don't see any appreciable savings by going out and requoting. And you would just take and, you would lose the amount of time until your next regular council meeting.
It would be a next year's project.
Yeah, and there's extra time and effort and cost of the city staff to have to put together information, go out and get the quote. So what you would potentially save in the quote, you may eat up in the time and effort you spent getting the new
Might
bolts.
even be higher.
Yeah.
Could even be higher, yeah, if they had got hooked up in the meantime. Could
You know,
even be higher.
And worse
Okay,
is
millions
they try to hurry it up this fall.
Correct.
It's already
It's a bad job.
been suggested as to what it can be used for.
Yep, that was already included in bituminous materials quote.
No, I feel, take away the McCain, go with BMI.
I'm comfortable supporting that
I'll make that
recommendation.
motion if we accept the MI's bid and proceed with this project.
Then I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. I see we have a visitor. We need to back up to an earlier point in our agenda.
Hey, he showed up.
I believe we'll back up to presentation, public hearings, et cetera, and hear from Senator Schmidt.
I have handouts for everybody if you'd like. All right, well, thanks a lot for the chance to join you tonight, and I apologize for running late. I try to fit about 50 of these meetings in June and July and August. And if I don't do a couple every evening, it stretches into, the next year. So it's a session preview instead of a session review. Now, if you don't recognize my face, I lost my razor along the way, so. In any event, I just wanted to stop by and chat a little bit about the 2015 legislative session, talk about the highs and the lows, and maybe give a little preview of what we expect for 2016. Any questions or priorities, concerns, things I should be thinking about? I'd certainly like to hear that tonight. I guess first and foremost, look at the 2015 session, and I'll tell you probably the chief accomplishment. We resisted the temptation to tax, cut, or spend our way from surplus to deficit. I know that sounds like a joke, but it's important. After the last 10, 15 years in Minnesota, we've had a really rocky ride with our state budget. A string of deficits. A lot of that burden has been passed directly to local government. We've seen property taxes rise as a result. A lot of our local governments really burdened with Minnesota's financial strain. And so it's no secret, in 2013 we made some tough choices, raised some revenue, but that put Minnesota directly back in the black and in very healthy budget footing. And we've had some great economic news in the last couple of years, well beyond pre-recession employment numbers. We've led the country, been in the top couple of states in each of the last 3 or 4 years in terms of economic growth. And so things are going very well for the statewide economy. I always hesitate to put too much into that, though, because I know a lot of our communities are still struggling. And I think that's why it's so important for this legislature and those in the future to try to target resources and investments in areas that are struggling. And so when you look at what we were able to accomplish in 2015, I think that fiscal responsibility is the big takeaway. That's important. Our budget outlook could not be any better. Just yesterday, we got news that we were $30 million ahead of projected revenue for the month of July. Yeah, exactly. And since we left session at the end of May, we're over $100 million over projected revenue. And so the state economy is doing incredibly well. And we'll look at next year, we'll have at least $800 million in the bottom line. That's what this legislature left unspent or cut in terms of taxes for next year. And I think that puts us in a position after a couple additional state economic and budget forecasts in this November and February to make well-informed long-term decisions as to what to do with those surplus dollars. I wouldn't lie to you. I mean, I think if we're running surpluses, I think tax reform and tax relief is something that's going to be on our agenda. And I would think local government aid is going to be primary among the agenda items. Also, federal tax conformity is a big deal, making sure that Minnesota's tax code is aligned with the federal tax code so that those individuals or businesses who have credits or deductions at the federal level can also enjoy those at the state level, so folks aren't getting burned. Well, if you offer those credits or deductions, it costs money, and so it's called a tax expenditure for us. We should have plenty on the bottom line for a good, healthy tax bill next year. Another thing that I would look to focus on next year is hopefully a comprehensive transportation package. That's the one thing that we were not able to get accomplished this year, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. The good news is, I think we've more or less agreed to the magnitude of the problem. Experts tell us that we underfund our roads and bridges by as much as $1 billion a year, $1 billion with a B. And the House looked at leveraging around $750 million for transportation funding. Governor and Senate were more in line with that $1 billion number. But the bottom line is we're in the same ballpark, believe it or not. And the challenge is where the revenue comes from. And are we going to drive new revenue in the form of the gas tax, as the Senate and the governor proposed, constitutionally dedicated funding stream for our roads and bridges, a little bit for enforcement for the state patrol, or are we looking to the general fund to come up with those dollars? And I'll tell you, that was the sticking point this year, not necessarily the size of the bill, but where the revenue comes from. And if you look at that handout I gave you, there's a back page on here. And what I try to emphasize here is the influence of inflation on our budget picture in St. Paul. Our state economic forecast we have it every November and every February, does not take inflation into account. And so when you're looking at potential